13 laps, 40.4 kilometres. There are the grid positions. Let's hope that Peter Brock's car, with a brand new back axle installed in it in the hour or so since the last heat, have got the car percolating properly. And there's the latter part of the grid. Bill O'Brien, Gary Cook, Bob Muir scratching, Colin Bond. And it means in all a field of 27. The scratching of Bob Muir, replaced by the addition of Murray Carter, still at the tail end of the grid, despite a gallant fight back to 6th place in the first heat. A grand job by Carter, who never gives up and never seems to diminish his enthusiasm for motor racing. Look down the grid there, the tail end view of the front row, with Alan Brown, who went so well in the heat. But Grice, perhaps one of the sensations of that. Steve Harrington, Jansen, then Gary Cook, who went wide in the opening lap. The Masterton cars of Bond and Steve Masterton. Peter Williamson there, the 2-litre Celica. That car, number 25, the Ray Alford Falcon, that had a bad prang this morning in the warm-up just before midday, but has been repaired by an enthusiastic crew. The front of the car quite heavily damaged, and it's a big field lining up now. 30 seconds to go. And the last mechanic from the Peter Brock team walking away after consulting with his lead driver. So here it is then, the start of the second heat, to be held over the same distance as the first. 13 laps, 40.4 kilometres around Sandown, the Bill Patterson Trophy race. Heat 2 of the 4th round in the Australian Touring Car Championship. They're under starters' instructions. The national flag at the ready. Johnson chasing yet another win in what has been so far a great year for the Queenslander in the Blue Falcon. Peter Brock hoping that he can recover with great form with 10 seconds to go from that lousy luck in the first heat where the differential broke free. Flag up. Down and a great start for Johnson. Brock doesn't move. The field streams past. There he is stationary. Everybody finding their way around safely. And Peter Brock will be wheeled away as Johnson goes into lead, followed by Grice Jansen, Gary Cook and Alan Brown. As they go through Repco corner for the first time. That's the first 5. Then Bill O'Brien a little bit further back in the car, but he's shared. Steve Harrington coming, no, that's Brown. Brown under Gary Cook. Then Steve Harrington, Colin Bond up there punching. And that dismal scene, and the Ford fans really reefing at home to the Holden Commodore fans as Peter Brock, the reigning Australian Touring Car Champion, is wheeled away. This man wants the title.
What a disaster for the Marlborough Holden dealer team. One of the very few in the long career of the Peter Brock and that team. But it's all Dick Johnson with the rest of the field right behind him. Alan Grice, Peter Jansen.
That's equivalent to the debut of the V16 BRM years ago in England when it first appeared with royalty present, and it moved only a couple of feet. And for Peter Brock to do that in front of his hometown crowd as Johnson comes round in the lead at the end of the first 13 laps is about the same sort of national disaster.
Well, it certainly is a national disaster. But Alan Grice is doing a superb job with the BMW, but Dick Johnson really has this race won. And if he can keep it all straight and tidy. Peter Jansen in 3rd place. Alan Brown 4th. And now we go down to Drew Morfitt with Peter Brock.
Well, in all the years I've been watching in motor racing, I haven't seen you have a worse day.
No, it's excellent. Unfortunately. Well, we had a very strange thing happen to the dip housing there at the first race, which it just was fretting on the tubes which would locate the wheels, and it allowed the nose of the diff, where the front universal joint bolts on, to lift itself up and run with the tail shaft against the floor, which was a bit strange to say the least, because it was the car was actually being supported by the bouncing tail shaft, so I just had no option to call on the pits. Now, just then, I don't know, but there's absolutely no drive anywhere, and I would suggest that it is something to do with the gearbox or the clutch, and I would say that it's caused by the earlier problem, quite frankly.
Really? So you went into the second heat believing that you were ready to go?
Oh, brand new dip housing, new tail shaft, everything. Absolutely everything. Yeah.
Unusual experience for you?
It is. Well, I guess it's a bit of experience for us too. through, because we found something that happened today which we've never seen happen in all the years we've been racing any of the Holdens. And whether it's a streak or it's a problem, I don't know, but one thing's for sure, it's nice to find these things out at this time of the year and perhaps still be able to get some points back for the Australian Touring Car Championship.
What happened to Peter Brock was very similar to what happened to Alan Grice with BMW when he failed to move off the grid at Amaroo Park in the 635 BMW last week. The diff mounting pulling loose, and in Grice's case it actually snapped one of the universal joints on the tail shaft. But there is the form of a man on an absolute high. He's put in the work because he prepares the cars, he does his own engines. He's not only the driver, he's the team manager, the financier, the dry and laconic 36-year-old Queenslander who has knitted it together so well this year in response to that enormous public sympathy last year in the Hardy Ferodo 1000. And how gratifying it must be for a man who, as I say, has put in so much effort in all departments of the race effort, followed then by Grice going so well in the early days of the BMW 635, Jansen behind, then Alan Brown, not far back to Steve Harrington and to Gary Cook. And it's not very far, as you can see, from first back to the second place car, 1.5 litres. No, sorry, 2.2 litres down on engine size to this big Falcon.
And if ever there was a story in this race other than the Peter Brock disaster, it would have to be the performance of Alan Grice. This BMW is the first time in a Touring Car Championship event and is performing superbly, driven by a really great driver to the John Player Special BMW 635. Rather makes a nonsense of the class arguments at Amaroo now, doesn't it? There's no way this could be a competitive with 3-litre cars.
No way. Of course, it's in a funny situation because at Amaroo in the Better Brakes series, it runs in a class up to 3 litres, from 2 to 3.5, up to 3.5 litres, from 2 to 3.5. Whereas here, it runs in an open class against the V8s because the lower class runs only to 3. So that in itself is a rather curious splitting of the classes, a lack of consistency through the range. And we see there Jansen in third, one of the great characters in local racing, saying this morning how Peter Brock had recently driven his car and said what a delightful car it was, the Jansen car. Beautiful, comfortable, easy car to drive, as Brock said, gloriously set up for long distance races, not quite as twitchy and as quick as mine, but a delightfully steady and easy car to wrestle with.
Certainly going a lot better than Alan Brown's car in this race, as we saw in the previous event. A very fine tussle between Alan Brown, who is behind Peter Jansen, but now Jansen is well ahead of Alan Brown. You see him just coming into your picture on the right there.
In fact, Jansen will shortly, as we look at Brown in fourth place, be enlisting the help of Larry Perkins to help prepare the car, along with Ian Tate, who specialises in engines, of course, and has done for many years, including the Holden dealer team, but who's been looking after Jansen's car overall. But now we'll have Larry Perkins, and they're going to start a bit of a development program on that car, and hope, as we look at Steve Harrington, hope that they can get some more outright performance out of it. But no more outright performance needed by Johnson. As we look down the straight to the young Queenslander, 16 Neil Crompton and Gary Cook in car 2 on the outside, going by him down the straight.
And Murray
towards
Carter,
Murray Carter, yes, in front of them, and Bill O'Brien behind in the car that he shared last year with Bob Morris in some events. Gary Cook surprisingly tight on his exit there, and therefore the tail of the car swinging out. But look at this 18-year-old Queenslander, Neil Cunningham, helped by his mother in budgeting for that car and doing a good job in it. The ex-Alan Grice Craven Mile team, as it was, car, the car that Bob Morris drove last year early on in the early days of Holden Commodore development, and a car that for the Grice team was notably unsuccessful and bad handling at that stage, but a lot more is now known about setting Commodores up for racing. And Neil Crompton, this 18-year-old, who somebody facetiously remarked about him, he had to rent a couple of his home units to help finance his racing in the last couple of events, but has been going very well, as you can see by the way he's leading the veteran Gary Cook.
Alan Grice through the back markers, followed by Peter Jansen. Second and third cars there, passing Craig Bradke's Lancer. But it's all Dick Johnson. The Queenslander leading very easily in this fourth round of the championship, ready to increase his points lead.
Every single Ford supporter in the stands rubbing it in on every lap as Johnson goes by. This nice margin to Grice, but look at the margin, Grice to Jansen, second to third. Not very great, a couple of seconds only. They're half race distance, 6.5 laps completed in a 13-lap run. This is the race leader. That's the gap to 2 and to 3.
This is where Dick Johnson will be keeping his revs down. He won't be stretching the engine. It'll last another race this way.
With fourth place Alan Brown in the distance, fifth place Steve Harrington also just quickly visible there.
Gary Cook, Neil Cunningham, the 18-year-old and the veteran. Neil being the 18-year-old and Gary Cook being the veteran. In a very fine tussle here between these two Commodores.
Cunningham, a very wiry, light build. Nowhere near as solid as Gary Cook in car 2. And up the straight they go. He's been racing very long, this young boy in car 16. Not making a bad fist of it. Fairly determined in all ways, in the sense of his driving, but also in the sense of putting money into it. And he said a couple of weeks ago at Lakeside, frankly, as we see Bradke just go out of sight and Gary Cook still leading him, he said, I want to drive in Formula One if I can.
Great experience he's getting here from Gary Cook. I think there wouldn't be many tricks that Gary Cook wouldn't know, and if Neil's watching, he'll learn them from him.
Behind them there and not far behind. Up the top, let's see if the impetuosity of youth puts him under Gary Cook, but you can see he's not quite close enough. And he's got time still to try and pull off a manoeuvre past him. Goodyear corner after the S's. Done now, 8 laps. They're on their 9th in the 13 lap second heat of this fourth round of the Bill Patterson Trophy race, commemorating the name of one of our great talented drivers, Gerald William Patterson, as we look at the race leader now. Dick Johnson, followed by Grice, followed by Jansen. Yes, Bill Patterson, an Australian driving champion and a great talent, and his father a Wimbledon tennis champion. And still a great supporter of motor racing. Johnson just telling somebody that he's about to come by at about 50 kilometres an hour greater speed than the man he's lapping. Up over the top where the car gets light and the man is so committed.
Picking his way on the road rather than using the curbs, save the tyres as well. No reason to stretch this car at all.
The Clouds RX-7 in front, indicating go left. Johnson will, but he has noticed the caution there. He comes round under the Dunlop Bridge again and towards the Ford flags in the grandstand. His fans waiting for his arrival as they've been every lap. And up they go, the arms, the flags, the hands, the cheers and the whistles. As Johnson completes his 9th, has 4 laps to go. Grice 2 coming up to lap the Cloud. He can't let up, with Jansen looming in that close behind.
One wonders how the BMW will go in some of the other rounds. He's not going to Western Australia, but there are plenty of other races left, and it could be the surprise. Certainly when we get into the long distance season, we'd expect to see Alan Grice right up there, probably leading after a while.
This dice being repeated between Alan Brown in the foreground as Neil Cunningham in 16 goes round, got a fire in the exhaust pipe underneath. It's just whispered its way out now, just a bit of fuel, but experience has triumphed over impetuosity. And there's the fire again, just under the centre of the car, just whistling its way back, and the officials there unaware of it. And it's come back again, just in the exhaust pipe as he's trying probably to fire the car up. There's absolutely nowhere to park the car, and now they've woken up as we look at second place Grice, third place Jansen, mingled in with other cars on the straight, coming round to the yellow flag area. There it is. Cunningham. Can't go yet, boys. There's Johnson. And finally, extinguisher, please, is the message.
Yes, having spun that car, there will be unspent fuel resting in the exhaust pipe, and now it's running. It'll blow itself out without too much trouble, although there could be trouble at the rear there. You can see the fuel tank underneath, maybe with a guard, maybe not. And I think that rear tyre doesn't look too good either.
Nice going by them of Alan Brown in 4 and Harrington, Steve Harrington in the other car is Johnson. See the little bit of opposite lock there as the tail comes round out of that slow corner. The Queenslander feeds on the power. He knows how to build an engine, does Dick Johnson. He revs them very hard. They seem to stay together.
70 hours of work in one engine.
Yes, he puts in a lot of work, and he's never afraid to rev them at all. He takes them as high as 7,500 revs, which for a big V8 like this is a monstrous number of revs. Johnson now heading towards quite a handy lead over Peter Brock. He started today with a 1-point lead. That will build almost certainly to a 10-point lead as Grice and Jansen go through. Brock will be displaced from second place in the championship by Colin Bond, almost certainly, who started today 4 points behind him on 27 opposed to Brock's 31. Murray Carter is next in the championship on 15. Followed by Masterton and Laurie Nelson on 10 together, and Peter Williamson on 9, Peter Jansen on 8. So nobody else is going to catch Brock. But Johnson, this man in 17, is going to be very nicely placed. And with 3 points gap between first and second each time, a 10-point lead means if Johnson keeps finishing the races, even if second to Brock, Brock has got more than 3 races in which to make up the leeway, and that means, and that's even with the tall order of beating Johnson on each occasion. And the rounds still to come where Brock doesn't look sometimes too favourably at his chances. Johnson's off with 3.1 kilometres to go now, and his final lap heading to that 10-point lead. The rounds still to come. Wanneroo in Western Australia, Adelaide, and that's only 2 weeks hence. Adelaide, May the 3rd, Surfers Paradise 2 weeks after that on the 17th of May, and the championship is decided by the 21st of June at Lakeside. So Dick Johnson, 4 races to go, a 10-point lead. Now we'll be looking for not only the speed that he's got, but the reliability that he's had so far. His only problem, his only defeat in the series this year, a puncture in the second heat with Calder that saw him spin off and Peter Brock go through to win that heat and to win the round. Peter Williamson in front will be lapped by Johnson as he runs towards the checkered flag. There's no question that the Ford flag fans will be off the air. There they go. Johnson comes through. 2 immaculate performances, 20 points within each heat as Peter Brock comes forward with Ian McKnight of the Light Car Club to the presentation, but 9 points in the total series for the year. And this great dice, Alan Brown still going, Steve Harrington though still in arrears as they finished in the first heat, coming home behind Grice and Jansen in 4th and 5th place. There's Jansen's car, and there are the results.